Now it's a real pleasure to introduce Melina Morrison, who came to us all the way from Australia, from Sydney, and Melina is the, I guess, president, you would say, of the CEO of the Peabody, which, if you don't know what that means, is the most important organization advocating for cooperatives and mutuals in Australia. And so as she asked me to introduce her as somebody from the establishment that is still okay, you know, she's a good person. So I don't know, Melina was so nice to tour me around Australia, and we had a lot of fun and met a lot of cooperatives. And she does very important and consequential work in Australia. So I hand it over to Melina.
Thank you. Can I use this one? I have to use this one. This one. I prefer to use that one, I think. This one, okay? Great. Thank you. Thank you for coming back. You're crazy, you platform people. There's two things about being last on the program that are bad. One is I stand between you and a drink. And the second is that everything's been said by now. So I took some notes today because I thought, well, first of all, Trebor basically did my speech this morning. No, not exactly. I wanted to think about what value can I bring to you guys at the end of the day. So I took notes on you, which I think, is really the most important thing. What I learned today, what really was sheeted home from your wonderful presentations, is that all of the tools and all of the ideas to create a more equitable future through sharing the ownership and control, particularly of technology and data, is in this room. It's in this community. But not only that, the motivation to apply the power of business for social good is also here in this room. And that's a very, very powerful idea. It's what attracted me to cooperatives. And I think it's important to just revisit that from a personal point of view. It certainly is for me. I couldn't get out of bed every day and do my job, which is primarily marketing the idea of cooperatives, a lot of the time to politicians, unless I deeply believed in cooperatives and cooperation. I really believe that it is a great way to do business if you're making money to do something and not the other way around. And that's a very important distinction in the way that our forms or people-centred forms of business work, because it infects the culture and the objective of the business. Smart reminded us today, or certainly reminded me, how important it is that we understand cooperatives as a patient business model. And whilst the wicked problems of society and the planet really motivate us to want to do things right now with cooperatives as one solution, they're not always amenable to being put against a problem as a fix-it-all solution. They're not a panacea in themselves for fixing all of the world's ills. And that's because they're people-centred. So there is a tension, and I was thinking about where that tension is between a technocratic approach to solving a problem, using, for example, a template business model, and the idea that this form of business is derived from co-design, from people coming together to solve solutions. And there's a certain organic and it can be difficult at times, but it's not, it's very contextualised. It's highly contextualised business solution, which is one of its strengths, place-based. I suppose the last thing I'd like to say from the co-op movement's point of view is that if you're waiting for the co-op sector the formal co-op sector to support you or to fund you, don't. Because between that, and I mean that with best interests, there's a lot of white papers, there's a lot of conferences, and there's a lot of talk shops between the co-op sector and what you're doing right now. You're innovating right now. We do have work to do, and people like Trebor are urging the cooperative movement to get on and support and invest in, a simple thing, invest in co-op startups with co-op money. A very simple idea, but in fact, the incubators that we see around the world are still investing in unicorn ventures using venture capitalism. So that we do have to do work as a co-op sector, and that's what I do every day. But I think it's important to just get on with innovating. This is a self-help movement, and combined with democracy, and through the crises of economic change that we've seen over the last couple of centuries, co-ops tend to emerge when there's a crisis. They tend to turn up. And I actually think that right now is the place for co-ops to turn up in terms of platforms. The sharing economy, if you like, in a very short time has already is failing in the markets that it's created. Uber is already creating market failure through its scale, through its ubiquity, through lack of competition. And so it's the right place and it's the right time, and plurality matters. There's no right way. Everything that you're doing is the right way. And it's how we combine it and how we support each other that we'll see whether we can actually combine and share and scale this. So what I can contribute today is really just the story of what I do. So I head an organisation that is a peak body for cooperatives and mutuals, and it's funded, the sponsors if you like, if the members of it are larger cooperatives and mutuals. Many of them are the kind of cooperatives and mutuals that Trebor spoke about, that are so large and scaled and successful, if you like, that in fact the membership value proposition is highly diluted. I wouldn't say that means they're wrong. They are one example of what happens when a co-op or a mutual scales and becomes highly profitable, highly commercially successful. And they have a role in the economy as well. We're only 5 years old in Australia, our peak body. So we've never had a national body to represent the cooperative business model that was cross-sectoral. So it is a good time to think about how we've sowed the seeds of cooperative development in Australia. And we have had some success in quite a short time. So I'll share with you why I think that's happened. But it's primarily been around the issue of awareness raising, which is very important. We've had a particular methodology for getting legislative and regulatory change, which some of you guys have talked about. But I'm just going to start here with the first point, cooperation is back, because the main thing that I'm concerned about here today, but also in terms of what the Business Council of Cooperatives is doing in Australia, is narrative and storytelling. How well do we tell our story as cooperatives? I would say not very well, and perhaps not in a joined up enough way, and what that's creating an existential threat for the cooperative sector. And that is because of something which I call mutual wash, which is that we've got a great idea for doing business, and all businesses, particularly mainstream corporate businesses with the scandals that are occurring around their business model, realise that, and so they are colonising some of our messages. Have you guys seen this video today? Tell me if you have. I'd just like to play it because I think it's a bit of fun. Tell me if you've seen it.
The rest of this day is history. You see, old business models, they're dead. It's all about sharing. It's cabs, homes, hotels.
You listening to this? The sharing economy. And their company is a $60 billion company now. Real dollars, billion. Come on. So when are you geeks going to come up with the next big thing, huh?
Well, I mean...
Am I paying the rent on that stupid startup house for nothing?
I mean...
Am I paying for beer, pizza, ping pong tables, and that stupid bike for nothing?
Actually, you didn't
Figure it out.
pay for that.
Just got to start with something ordinary, you know?
I can't.
Well, let's think of something.
I'm trying, I am.
What do we do, like, every day?
I don't know, eat, sleep, drink.
No, it's got to be something you pay for, stupid. Come on, think.
Okay, I pay for things I buy.
What did you say?
I buy stuff.
You buy stuff.
So it's an app?
No, it's like an idea where we invite everyone to kind of develop a place to buy stuff owned by themselves.
And how's that gonna work?
I don't know. That's what you guys got to figure out.
So combining consuming with owning, sort of.
Exactly. A huge thing, kind of co-owned by the people that would give them tons of benefits, like discounts every time they bought something. Maybe.
I think you're talking about real stores.
So it's an app?
No, a real chain of stores that's going to sell everything from groceries to bicycles.
And everyone can be a co-owner.
We will use the power of many to press prices.
Like sharing economy.
I love it. Now this is it, you guys. So do you have a name for it?
Yeah, we have been working on one.
I came up with this.
Co-op? Like cooperation?
Of course. Coop. Ooh, that's a catchy name. How is it even possible no one ever thought of this before?
Had you guys seen that? It was a 150-year anniversary of, is it Finnish or Norwegian cooperative retailer? I'm not sure. So yeah, 150-year-old. I mean, that's kind of an in-joke in the for the co-op sector, but for my colleague at the ICA, it's really important to remind ourselves it's not good enough to just have a good idea. You have to disseminate that idea. You have to try and embed it in an intrinsic way in people's consciousness. So we're seeing mutual. I'm always on the lookout for mutual wash. I'm paranoid about it now because I don't know if any of you saw that Airbnb is now going to offer some kind of equity or ownership in the company for the people who rent their rooms on the platform. The big guys will always get there more quickly, with more money, with more fancy marketing. So we have to tell our story authentically. We have to tell it quickly, but mindfully, because it is hard to compete. This is a listed bank in Australia that managed 11 years ago to trademark community bank. That means that there are 80 cooperative banks in Australia, credit unions and building societies that are community banks. They're owned by the community, can't use community bank on their websites or in their advertising. So it's, it can be serious. But the reason this bank uses that is because it deeply knows fundamentally what people are also looking for in business, which is a sense that business creates community, that it has shared value, not only shareholder value. This was just 2 weeks ago. We had a visit by the first female CEO of Lloyd's TSB, who has a very good idea for the way you should do banking, where you put the interests and focus on the best interests of the consumer. Much like what a credit union does. So the brightest people in the room agree with cooperative models. This slogan is actually from the cooperative sector in 2012, in the International Year of Cooperatives. But it could be any business, because this is the way that, and we saw this with the sharing economy, this is the way that magic marketing goes. And Trebor was one of the first people who really showed me most clearly just how invidious the marketing around the sharing economy was. So we've just done some reports, a poll in Australia, some more research. The use of cooperatives and mutual businesses in Australia is actually growing. So 8 in 10 Australians are members of at least one mutually owned organisation, which is brilliant. And in fact, that usage is increasing in the Gen Y group, which is where a lot of large institutional cooperatives like credit unions want to get new members. And this is actually up from research that we did in 2012. So the use of cooperatives is going. And when we asked this same statistical poll what they thought about business ownership styles, we can see that the majority of people agree that it's not always great to have shareholders owning your corporations. And in fact, people value community-centred businesses very highly. But here's the piece that's been the main motivating force for having a council of cooperatives in Australia, and that is this cognitive dissonance. The same group of people who use cooperatives and mutuals don't know they do. They're not aware of this, and there are many reasons why there's such a systemic lack of awareness of alternative business models, not only cooperative business models. A lot of it has to do with our education system. I mean, in Australia at the moment, if you're a lawyer or an accountant, you will graduate with your wonderful degree or your commerce degree without doing 1 hour of work on the cooperative business model. So the awareness gap is actually growing, and that is a reason that I use to suggest to members of the Business Council that they should stay in a collaborative brand project with each other. It's something that they can't do on their own as individual businesses. It's something they have to actually do by cooperating. And of course, you guys are here because you know this, that the collaborative economy is already being, whatever we like to call it, the sharing economy, the renting economy, the extractive economy that is being disrupted. It's being disrupted because it's already being shown to fail markets and to fail the stakeholders, primarily the labour force that supplies them. Nesta is a UK think tank. So before we get to fixing how we're looking at fixing the issues for cooperatives and mutuals in Australia, which our focus is primarily on the regulatory and the legislative, the enabling environment for the businesses, so that if you choose to set up a cooperative or mutual, it should be no harder to use that model of business than any other business model. So we have a basic principle about parity of treatment. But we have to really know why cooperatives and mutuals matter. There's been a lot of discussion over the 2 days, and that's why I feel like I'm repeating myself. Because you guys are here and you're being inventive and creative and innovative because you actually can sense that there is a need for another way to manage technology. As I said before, Uber is already breaking the markets in which it operates in. And when I talk mostly to governments, and I'm talking about the legislative and regulatory reforms that co-ops need, I talk about what's in it for government. The utility of the business model to governments is what matters to them. It's not what we need as cooperatives and mutuals. So governments, particularly the government we have in Australia at the moment, which is a coalition, more conservative government, is interested in less regulation. It's interested in smaller government, and yet many of the players that are coming into our markets, including Uber, including Deliveroo, many of the other Death Star platforms you've been talking about, are creating the need for more regulation. So when I speak to governments, I talk about how diversity of business models, competition between business models, as well as competition between businesses can actually help government to not have to regulate as much. When I'm talking to unions or to other labour and workforce advocacy bodies, I talk about what's been spoken about a lot here, about the need to create businesses, particularly the future of work in the gig economy, casualised economy, business models that do not exploit or undermine labour and basic premises of good workforces. So this need for these platforms to exist on unprotected sources of labour is also one of the drivers in Australia at the moment and around the world for more regulation. So there's a very important economic reason in terms of market economies, certainly why you need cooperatives, why you need diversity and competition between business models. In markets where cooperatives and mutuals play an important role, they are pacemakers. They set price signals. In Australia at the moment, we're having a big debate about private health insurance. It used to be that 70% of the private health insurance market was mutually owned. Now that's inverted. It's 30% and is possibly shrinking. So it's important for us to discover and to research and to know why mutuals in a market like health insurance create a stabilising force that doesn't allow the inflation of the costs of people doing business. If you have only, and we saw that of course in the GFC, if you have all your eggs in one type of business basket, you have a lot, you're very, very vulnerable to market volatility. We're long-term, so again, back to what the lovely lady from Lloyd's TSB Bank was saying, now is the time for us to concentrate on long-term vision, not short-term vision. And of course, we create sustainable work. Something that's really resonating when I speak to politicians now is this issue around the rise in populist ideology and populist politics. As we know from monitors like the Edelman Trust Barometer, trust in institutions, not only business, but religious, faith-based institutions, sport, big business as usual, is totally broken. And in the last barometer, the last modelling that Edelman did, there's no shift in that. In that climate of distrust, people are not only feeling like they don't know how they're going to play a part or how they're playing a part in the economy, how they can get their fair share of the pie, they also feel increasingly vulnerable, and that drives them towards the advocates of protectionism, for example. And this is an existential threat to democratic government. Technology, as we know, is not going away. It's an enabler, and provided it can be built in a way that counts people in all the ways that you're innovating around, it's a force for good. When the Luddites smashed the mills, it didn't stop the arrival of industrialisation. People are not throwing their iPhones out because they know that Uber is an extractive platform. So we have to do something with this technology. We have to make it work for ourselves. So the gloss is coming off the sharing economy. I think finally we're getting the message, are we, Shabor, that it's not the sharing economy just because you say it's the sharing economy. It has to genuinely share not only the platform but ownership. Or count people in. So the backlash against the tech giants is an opportunity for disruption. But we're still not seeing people switching. With the Facebook scandal, how many people do you know who took themselves off Facebook? Did? That's it. I mean, the strongest message that Mark Zuckerberg could have got was a wholesale signing off from Facebook, and that didn't happen. So it's very hard to get people to shift, even when we know we're being exploited. So if we're going to sow the seed of an idea, it has to be ingrained at a very deep level in the psyche of everyday people. It's a deep intrinsic knowledge that there are other ways to do business. And that has to happen at all parts of the life cycle of business innovation. So it does have to start with the incubators. It has to start with the social entrepreneurs. There's a very narrow paradigm of business models that are presented to people who truly want to be innovative. So how are we doing around selling the unique selling point of cooperatives from my part of the world, the formal cooperative sector? Not so well, and we have to do better. And that's why we did that research that I showed you before. So we're going back to basics, and we're actually just showing what the business model is as widely as possible. So here's a little infographic
In business, ownership and control are important. It determines who benefits from a business and its activities. In a publicly listed company, the business is owned and controlled by investors. The purpose of the company is to make a financial return for those investors. But in this business model, ownership and control can become concentrated in the hands of a few. But there's a different way of doing business. In a cooperative or mutual enterprise, or CME, ownership and control is shared equally amongst members. A co-op's purpose is to provide benefits back to its members. Members of a co-op are drawn from the stakeholders of the business. These can be customers or employees or people in the local community. In a credit union or member-owned bank, the members are the customers. In a producer co-op, members are the farmers. And in a worker co-op, members are the employees. Co-ops also benefit the local economy. Returns from a co-op stay with members and are reinvested in the local community. CMEs have a long and proud history in Australia. The first co-ops were friendly societies set up in the mid-19th century to care for sick people, widows and children. These were followed by retail co-ops, dairy co-ops, motoring organisations, building societies and credit unions. Today, more than 8 in 10 Australians are members of a CME, and there are 1 billion co-op members globally. Some of the world's best-known brands and organisations are member-owned. Even famous football teams are owned as a cooperative. Wherever they are in the world, cooperatives operate under the same international principles of cooperation. These principles are based on democracy, self-help, economic participation and concern for the community. To find out more about cooperatives in Australia, please visit the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals website. In business, ownership and control are important. It determines who benefits from a business and its activities.
Yep, okay, I've got it. So you see, I can't run technology. I don't know why you've got me here. I'm a middle-aged woman, I can't run my phone. But technology's got to work for me as well. So we're in the job of marketing, simple idea to a broad-based audience. A lot of the audience for that simple little cartoon is our own members. In Australia, just as around the world, I'm sure, as our friend at the ICA knows, cooperatives themselves are not broadly aware of their own scale and breadth and reach. And embedding ourselves in the economic story of Australia is really important for cooperatives. Where I come from. Another important thing is just to know what our scale is, the simple job of measuring what you are, what you do. Maybe we're not, this is the tyranny of the measurable, and we do need to do, the next step is to measure the total value creation. We have a research project at the moment, which we're really excited about with an accounting department at a university in Australia called Monash University, which is to see if we can break the accounting framework that measures only certain things and build a new framework for cooperatives that will capture the total value creation so that we can count in the things that we do, as Tribor was saying this morning. So we're about 8.3% of GDP in Australia, which is huge. It's the second after the mining economy. And that's because we have a huge mutually owned pension sector in Australia. I don't know if you know about the superannuation sector. Most superannuation, which is retirement savings funds, are member owned. They have something like $3 trillion in retirement savings, and so that boosts our part of the economy. But it's the same DNA. Member owned, not shareholder owned. Democratically governed. So we set ourselves up to present a countervailing narrative to the idea that the economy is constructed of certain types of businesses. So there are charities and not-for-profits, there are investor-owned corporations and small businesses, but there's also these guys, which are the CMEs. So we've coined the term CMEs, which is now popping up in all sorts of government papers. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but we wanted something that could actually capture our sector in an easily recognisable way, and that stands for cooperative and mutual enterprises. So if people were able to understand that there were SMEs, we thought that it would help if they could understand that there were CMEs. And we really want to get the economic message right, and that is that cooperatives are a rational alternative to investor-owned businesses. I don't know if you've seen the news, but we've had out of Australia, we've had a really big Royal Commission, it's called, inquiry, federal government inquiry into the banking sector, which has shown a huge amount of misconduct in the traditional banking sector. And that's given us a chance to talk about what it means when the consumer is the purpose. In a customer-owned bank, for example, the consumer or the customer is the purpose of the business, not the profit centre. What it all comes down to, I believe, in cooperatives is it's enlightened self-interest. People realising that there's more in their self-interest out of cooperating than there is out of competing is what drives membership. And this is the most important difference, and I think it's not spoken about enough, and that is that the main difference between other business models is member ownership and control, the democracy which links to your economic participation. So, just to finish, where are we at in Australia? I won't do that little movie. We set up, I'm going to go over that, we set up the Business Council off the back of the United Nations International Year of Cooperatives. That was our window of opportunity. For 12 months, we had the chance to shine a light on what cooperatives were doing in Australia, and we took that chance to build some sort of esprit de corps, if you like, in the movement, in the sector, and get them to look at this as a long-term legacy project, not just one year of celebrating cooperatives. So the next year, in 2013, we launched the Business Council. We started with 10 businesses. It's always been based around what the businesses saw as their compelling reason for cooperating. And I think that's been one of the reasons of the success of the Business Council in Australia over the short term, is getting the cooperatives themselves to buy into the idea that they needed to collaborate around market awareness. So now we're 50 members, and we primarily do these things. We promote the business model. We foster more networking, cooperation between cooperatives. We do the research and the evidence building that they weren't doing as individual businesses, that you have to do in a joined up way, and that we have to do internationally. So important to do data gathering. Aimed at increasing, and this is our big, hairy, audacious goal, our BHAG, is to have a bigger slice of the Australian economy that belongs to mutuals. Because we honestly and truly and deeply believe that more cooperatives in the economy drives more prosperity and stronger growth and more productivity and all of those things that politicians like to talk about. We've spoken about identity. It's very important that identity is actually built on understanding what the business model is about. So we've been measuring the Australian cooperative economy for the last 5 years, and all of our evidence and our research is open source. It has been really important to bring the sector together, to network with each other, to learn from each other. We had a very siloed sector before the Business Council of Cooperatives formed, and it's been one of the biggest spurs to academic institutions, particularly universities, getting on board and actually coming up with cooperative education courses. A lot of the work that I have to do is with the media, because again, we call this the ninja economy. It's hiding in plain sight. Journalists and the media just don't think of member-owned businesses when they're talking about business. And this is our political strategy. We start with working out what it is, what are the wish list of the sector, what needs to change, and access to capital, Steve talked about before, is one of the most important things. Then we build bipartisan political support by talking to different politicians, different sides of politics about what the cooperative model means to them. and that has led to policy activities. So that's just some of the successes, I guess, we've had as a sector, but only by, and this is fundamentally important, speaking with one voice, buying into a unified wish list or ask to make it very, very clear that the co-op sector is cooperating, is on message about this. So we've had a couple of government inquiries. They were very important because they allowed government to look at itself and realise where the inhibitors and barriers were, and that's led to the first time that we've had some funding for the sector. Finally, and to go back to something I said before, we talk to government and we talk to stakeholders about the utility of the model. So right now, it's not just about platform, it's not just about the gig economy where, cooperatives and the future of work, cooperatives have a real role to play. We have a social care crisis in Australia, as you do around the world. We've got an ageing demographic. That's the tyranny of demographics. We're getting older, we're not dying as early. That should be great, but it's being seen as a problem in Australia because we've got a workforce challenge. And this is where we think cooperatives can help get a motivated, productive, engaged workforce that wants to stay working in what is, in many areas, it's a pretty low-income field of work to be working in. We're also talking to governments about how cooperatives can invest in public infrastructure like transport, hospitals, and the like, aged care homes. We talk to business owners, particularly small business owners who are looking at selling or succession for their businesses, and workers and consumers about how cooperatives can make better values-based decisions in business. We talk to unions about job security and better wages. We talk to data advocacy groups about data protection. And finally, we talk to consumers about accountable business models, accountability in business models. Trebor showed the pioneers, 1844. So I was just going to look back. These clever pioneers came up with 7 principles that you guys are engaging around today. So those ideas of economic participation, training and education, the platform cooperatives kit, the idea that you would build in to your business model, the idea of sharing cooperative education and training is vital, and cooperation amongst cooperatives. But pioneers exist, they don't exist just in the past, they exist now. And everyone in this room, I've just got a few up there. Everyone in this room can be a pioneer, and you are a pioneer. The cooperative model isn't in aspect, it's not caught in time. It has to innovate and it has to evolve with the time. And we have, through time, we've also had some great third-party advocates, and it's important to remind ourselves that everywhere where we're seeing a discussion about the new economy, or how should the economy go from now, based on the things that have happened out of the GFC, out of climate change and all of the other problems, that people are struggling to find new models, new ways of doing things. And this is what I think the new economy can look like. The co-ops that are the little peaks above the water, if there are co-ops, emerging out of the work that you're doing, are actually this vast iceberg of ownership, of capital, of cooperation, and that it's the ability to capture the broad base, the democratic ownership base that is so exciting for me and working in cooperatives. So I commend you all for your work on the new economy. Thanks very much. Questions?
Well, yeah, thank you for this very motivating talk. And I think you're transmitting very much the positive energy that comes from what you call the formal cooperative economy sector. My feeling is, like, having been in touch with some of them and having tried the very thing, getting support from them, realizing, okay, that's not the way to go. I'm wondering, isn't one of the real challenges there that many of the very large cooperatives, those that people actually know, aren't living the cooperative principles? And I have actually a little bit of a resistance by now to promote the cooperative model as the solution and the way to go, just because it doesn't seem that everything that calls itself a cooperative actually is a cooperative. So that for me is really one of the challenges, yeah, where I still don't have the answer, and I still wonder how bodies like your association, what is your view on this?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. I mean, one of the Achilles heel, or maybe it's actually a success of the cooperatives, is they build in their own obsolescence. Cooperatives often form out of a crisis, market failure, social injustice, thin markets. When they solve that originating issue, they have to continually reinvent. They should either cease to exist, perhaps, they've solved the problem, or they need to reinvent and keep working with their membership to work out what is their objective. And that bit around working with membership is the sticky point for a lot of large mutuals and cooperatives. So what bodies like ours are doing is trying to get the cooperatives and mutuals to turn the lens back on themselves and question whether they are truly living their cooperative values. And maybe it's not. There's no wrong or right way. Those cooperatives and mutuals that go and look more and more commercial, if they actually convert or demutualise to a listed organisation, they're no longer a cooperative. If they are still member-owned, then whether we think that they are delivering on their core cooperative values or not is kind of a moot point. They must still be serving a member need, because the toughest point of business for a cooperative is to continue to attract and have user members. If members cease to find value in that business, then the business goes out of business. So the question for cooperatives and mutuals is really, are they continuing? And they will say that to you. Are we continuing to deliver value for our members? Do they have a wide... They certainly, if they're living their 7 cooperative values, they should be having a proper value proposition around concern for the community. And that's not just their community of members. It's the wider context in which they exist. So, yeah, I think it's an evolving discussion, but I largely agree with you. Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Anna. You mentioned climate change, of course. I'm wondering, based on these questions about, what's the objective of business and why are we doing this? From today and yesterday's energy here, I'm seeing that the cooperative movement is about the people that are seeking solutions to their problems, shopping or getting clothing or whatever. But the major problem is these issues of pollution, climate change, and so on. These are going to affect our future enormously, and in fact affect the businesses enormously. So isn't the cooperative movement really about how we change ourselves and how our work is meaningful? We're getting profit back from our work, we're doing all these, we're participating in our work, we're increasing our quality and attention to the quality of our work, but the world needs cooperative thinking. So for our own survival as humans on the planet. And I'm a little bit discouraged even to hear people saying, well, you know, you're doing cooperative at this point in order to achieve business goals, productivity goals, but are we maybe losing the idea of getting human goals, the human goals of solving the problems that business is supposed to be solving, and climate change is one of them. Thank you.
Well, you know, cooperatives are a legal business model. You know, what they do is they found a way of resolving the tension, aligning commercial success and social objectives. The social objectives are in the objective of the business. There's nothing more subversive, I believe, than giving people, distributing ownership to people. Whether it's millions of people in a consumer retail cooperative that may not, at the face of it, might just look like another big supermarket, but it is a distributed ownership model. If we're conflating the need, we do need to cooperate, which is why I put those statements up at the end, because leaders, through time, have realised the power of cooperation. It's how we do things, you know, if we do anything effectively at a global level, we do it by cooperating with each other, from the UN or, you know, whatever it is, global trade pacts. It's all, you know, it's all based on the behaviour of cooperation. We have to be careful about thinking about cooperatives as a business model as a panacea for solving all of the wicked problems. If we choose to do, if we are able to find cooperatives as a business model solution when we're trying to do something as communities, and it's the right fit, then it is a way of doing business where you can combine the making of capital, the production of capital, with a social objective. And if that social objective is getting affordable goods and services to people, it's as important, I would say, as finding a way cooperatively to say, you know, to deal with climate change. I think we do have to be careful about it is a social justice movement, because contained within cooperatives is the idea that you can make money to do something. Profit maximisation doesn't have to be the overriding goal of the business, but capital, labour and producers in a cooperative, they hire capital to achieve their objective. Capital is not driving the hire of labour. So that is achieving a social objective, whether it's a farmer cooperative or whether it's, you know, a Friends of the Earth group. The objective of the business can be provided through the cooperative model, and the justice that comes out of that is through that distributed ownership, I believe.
You mentioned policy and legislative engagement and like basically advocating for an enabling environment for cooperatives to thrive. And could you maybe tell us more about what that environment looks like and what policies we need, or, well, not need, but may be helpful for our local contexts?
So the legislative and regulatory environment that co-ops need, is that what? Yeah. So it's different in different countries and regions. In Australia, cooperatives are largely, they've been missing from the underlying purpose of the regulatory and legislative regimes that have been built to support business. So we've actually had to create awareness of cooperatives so that legislators can see that the existing legislation isn't serving them. If I can give one example, it's around access to capital. So in Australia, and it's different in different jurisdictions, But at the moment, if you're a mutual, if you're a member-owned organisation and you don't have shares on issue, which many of the larger mutuals don't have, they have member shares, but they don't have capital shares on issue. They can't raise investment capital without demutualising. So we've actually built into our legislative regime the means for the destruction of the business, the ethos of the business if it wants to raise investment capital. And as these businesses have got bigger and they're in competitive environments like banking, they have to be able to raise capital to be able to compete, you know, to be able to do a lot of the technological innovation that we expect. So, there's a lot of barriers to cooperatives just having what we would say is a level playing field. Another area is with the regulators, where they will. So the backlash at the moment against bank misconduct has to do with looking at whether regulation is strong enough, when it can actually paradoxically work against smaller banking institutions when you strengthen regulation, because the misconduct is not coming from their sector, but smaller institutions have to deal with the costs of implementing the regulation. And so it has a disproportionate effect on their businesses. We also need joined up in Australia, we need a completely unified legal regime for cooperatives. And that's quite a long project, but something that you've got to start somewhere and that we need to work. At the moment it's split. We have state jurisdictions in Australia, so 7 states and territories, and then we have a federal jurisdiction, and cooperatives are split between the states and the federal, which creates a lot of difficulties for businesses when they want to scale nationally. We also don't have any crowdsourced equity funding for cooperatives in legislation, which I was talking to Steve about before, which needs to be improved on.
Hello, this is Ichen from Taipei. I'm curious about, in your observation, when the scale of cooperative movement bigger and bigger, how's the competitive relationship between different business models? How does it change during this process? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Because I'm curious about between the different business model, even if they are all very concerned about the cooperative model or organization, how would it change when the scale of cooperative movement getting bigger? For example, between different like a cooperative platform or cooperative business company, they still be competitive for each other, is it or not? I'm not sure. In your observation.
Competition between cooperatives. Is that what you're talking about?
Competitive between different cooperative, like a model of unit.
Yeah. So if I understand your question right, that's a really important. It was a very important question to bring large cooperatives together in Australia who do compete with each other in the same markets. It's important for them to know that they can compete. So we have 80 credit unions, and they mostly want, to get members to their bank. The important part of forming a platform for cooperatives to cooperate was to help them find the things together that they can't do, enlightened self-interest again, they can't do themselves. So what they can't do as individual businesses is really shift the dial on the public's awareness of the cooperative business model so that consumers can join up their own desire to do business with more ethical business. It's like the fair trade mark And I suppose this is something for platform co-ops to think about. How do you facilitate people finding and understanding that this is a more ethical business if they choose to do business? So how can I, as a bank customer, if I feel disenchanted with existing large bank businesses, how can I find an ethical bank? So they have had to compete. They have had to find a way to cooperate, because that's the same issue for each of those banks. They still need to deal with the awareness problem, and that's a big problem with mutual wash. I think we do need to all keep our eye on where other forms of businesses are using our message and our branding to sell their, it happened with the sharing economy. I think, it's language matters. And so you do have to be on the front foot, and you have to be proactive about talking about what you're doing, actually exposing the actual way you're doing the business or the enterprise is really important to get back to simple messages, because lots of businesses out there are going to be talking about being community owned, being consumer owned, focusing on the consumer, but being for the user. Everything's about user centricity now. That's B Corps, the rise of B Corp. The idea that all businesses can bolt on benefit to their corporate status is being communicated well with a lot bigger budgets than we're necessarily doing in the cooperative economy. So this was something that we compelled them to cooperate around. But they do compete. It's fine that they compete in their own markets. It keeps them sharp and innovative as businesses. So cooperating to compete, I guess, is important.
Important for organic growth, okay, so that we don't become lazy and inertia by ourselves. So with this, we are coming to end, but let's put our hands together again for Melina Morrison.